I caught my husband cheating with my best friend on our kitchen. Now they're jobless and living off my daughter. Last year was, without question, the most heartbreaking year of my life. I stumbled upon something that shattered my world. I found out, completely by accident, that my husband at the time, Nolan, was having an affair with none other than my best friend, Clara. I had been away on a work trip, scheduled to be gone for a while, but by some stroke of luck, I managed to finish early and decided to surprise Nolan by coming home ahead of schedule. I didn't bother letting him know. I wanted it to be a nice little homecoming. But when I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Clara's car parked outside, and confusion immediately set in. She had been my closest friend since college, and over the years, our spouses had become part of our little circle. Still, Clara had never been the type to stop by unannounced, at least not without letting me know first. I checked my phone, thinking maybe she or Nolan had messaged me, but there was nothing, no calls, no texts. As I stepped inside, I heard noises coming from the kitchen. Curious, I followed the sounds, and what I saw when I turned the corner stopped me dead in my tracks. There they were, Nolan and Clara wrapped up in each other, tangled together right on my kitchen counter, so lost in their betrayal that they didn't even notice me standing there. I couldn't move. My entire body locked up as my brain struggled to process what I was looking at. This was the same kitchen where my husband and I had shared countless meals, where we had laughed, talked about our days, and built a life together. And now, in that very same place, he was with her. It felt like a dagger straight to my heart. The bag in my hand slipped to the floor, but they were so wrapped up in their moment that they still didn't see me. For months, Nolan had been distant. Intimacy between us had completely stopped, and instead of love, all I got from him were insults. He had taken to calling me names like fat pig and hippo, despite the fact that I wasn't even overweight. He pushed me to work out, blamed me for his lack of attraction, made me feel like I was the problem. I had spent all that time feeling worthless, believing that maybe I wasn't good enough for him anymore. But now, staring at them, I realized it was never about me. It had always been about him and his affair. Something inside me snapped. Every ounce of pain, betrayal, and humiliation I had been carrying for months came flooding to the surface all at once. Without even thinking, I reached for my phone and hit record. My hands were shaking, but I needed proof of what I was seeing. Then, fueled by sheer rage, I stormed into the kitchen. A pan was sitting on the counter, and before I could stop myself, I grabbed it and hurled it at Nolan. It struck him with a loud, satisfying thud, snapping both of them out of their little bubble. Their heads whipped around, their faces frozen in sheer horror as they finally saw me standing there, phone in hand, capturing every second of their disgrace. Clara frantically tried to cover herself, scrambling to find her clothes, while I walked straight up to her and, without hesitation, slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the kitchen, cutting through the stunned silence. She just stood there, humiliated and speechless. Nolan tried to step in, but I shoved him away, making it clear I wanted nothing to do with either of them. Through it all, I kept my phone recording, because if they thought they could get away with this, they had another thing coming. But I wasn't done. I stopped recording and immediately video called Clara's husband, Miles. My heart pounded, but I knew this was the right thing to do. He deserved to know the truth, just like I had. When he answered, completely unaware of what was about to hit him, I turned the camera to show him the scene: his half-naked wife scrambling to dress herself, her face etched with shame and panic. I calmly laid it out for him. I had come home early, only to find my husband and his wife together in my kitchen. Miles was stunned. I could see it in his eyes, the same shock, the same devastation I had felt just moments ago. He was at a complete loss for words. Meanwhile, Nolan, now realizing just how deep he was in, started yelling at me, saying I was taking things too far, that I was humiliating them unnecessarily. But I didn't care. I wasn't about to let them get away with this in silence. Clara, through her tears, kept apologizing, begging me to just hear her out, to listen to whatever excuse she was about to conjure up. But I was done. I told her to get out of my house before I did something worse. No apology, no explanation, could ever undo what she had done. I watched as Clara hurried out, her head hanging in shame, while Nolan just stood there, looking completely defeated. Some might say I have a short temper, but I've worked hard to build the life I have. I never needed a man to survive, and I certainly didn't need one who would betray me like this. If Nolan had wanted out of our marriage, he could have asked for a divorce like an adult. But instead, he chose to sleep with my best friend, in my own home, the home I paid for. That, to me, was unforgivable. When he finally found his voice and tried to apologize, swearing he was sorry, promising he could change, that he could be a better husband, I didn't even dignify him with a response. Instead, I went straight to our bedroom and started packing his things. That's when he lost it. He started shouting, accusing me of being insensitive for bringing up divorce over what he called a foolish mistake. He even tried to grab my hands to stop me from packing, but I wasn't having it. I looked him dead in the eyes and told him if he touched me again, I'd call the police and have him dragged out in front of the entire neighborhood. Nolan was always obsessed with his reputation, and I knew he'd rather die than let people see him get thrown out like that. But I also knew that if I hadn't caught him red-handed, he would have kept lying, kept cheating, and never once admitted to what he had done. That's just the kind of man he was. After a lot of back and forth, I finally managed to kick Nolan out of the house. But, unsurprisingly, with nowhere else to go, he turned to our daughter, Ruby, for help. Now, Ruby has always been closer to her father. Ever since she was little, she's been a daddy's girl through and through, and I never had an issue with that. If anything, I was glad they had such a strong bond. Even though it sometimes felt like she and I weren't as close, I never resented it. But in this situation, that closeness worked in Nolan's favor. When Ruby called me, she sounded confused and worried. She told me that her dad had reached out, saying I had kicked him out over some ridiculous argument, and now he had nowhere to go. He played the victim so well, conveniently leaving out the part where he had been caught cheating with my best friend. I didn't hold back. I told her exactly what had happened and sent her the video I had taken of Nolan and Clara together. I wanted there to be no room for doubt, no space for manipulation. She needed to see the truth with her own eyes. Ruby was furious. She told me she couldn't believe her father had done something so horrible, that she understood why I had thrown him out. But even through her anger, I could hear the hesitation in her voice, that little flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I would reconsider. She told me she was going to take care of him for now, that despite everything, she couldn't just abandon him completely. And as much as it stung, I understood. No matter what he had done, he was still her father. In the days that followed, both Nolan and Ruby started calling me, taking turns, wearing me down, trying to get me to forgive him for the sake of the family. It was manipulation at its finest, especially from Nolan. He knew exactly how much Ruby loved him, and he had no shame in using that love to his advantage. And honestly, that enraged me even more. Not just at him, but at Ruby too. I couldn't understand why, in all of this, she seemed more focused on helping him than standing by me. I was the one who had been betrayed. I was the one whose heart had been shattered. And yet, it felt like my pain didn't matter to her as much as making sure her father was okay. That realization cut deeper than I ever expected. But no amount of pleading or guilt-tripping was going to change my mind. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into staying in a marriage that was already beyond saving. My decision was final. I was divorcing Nolan, no matter what they had to say about it. Filing for divorce from Nolan was one of the easiest decisions I'd ever made. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just a firm resolve that I was finally taking back control of my life. Around the same time, Miles, Clara's husband, was going through his own divorce process. We were both blindsided by the betrayal, and in that shared devastation, we found a solid friendship. He was one of the few people who truly understood the depth of my pain, and talking to him made everything just a little more bearable. To be clear, though, our relationship was nothing more than that, just two people helping each other through a nightmare. When the time came to officially serve Nolan with the divorce papers, I did it at Ruby's house, since that's where he had been staying. The moment he saw them, he fell apart. Suddenly, all the arrogance, all the excuses, gone. Instead, he was desperate, scrambling to fix what he had so carelessly broken. He begged me to reconsider, swore up and down that he would never so much as look at another woman again. He even promised to cut Clara out of our lives completely, as if that would erase everything he had done. It was pathetic, honestly. Not because he wanted another chance, but because he only wanted one after he realized I was serious about leaving. Ruby was there too, watching everything unfold. When Nolan turned to her for support, she didn't hesitate to take his side. She pleaded with me to reconsider, saying she had grown up watching how much her dad loved me, and that one mistake, one accident, as she put it, shouldn't define our entire marriage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stared at her, trying to process how my own daughter could so easily downplay what he had done. This wasn't some drunken mistake or lapse in judgment. He had carried on an affair with my best friend. In my home. Behind my back. And for her to stand there and act like it wasn't as bad as it was, it broke something inside me. I told her, as calmly as I could, that this wasn't up for debate. Her father had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way, and there was no saving our marriage after that. I wasn't about to waste my life wondering when he'd cheat again. The trust was gone. The love was gone. And soon, he would be too. Ruby wasn't ready to let it go. But will you really be happy without him? She asked. That was the easiest question of all. Yes, I said, looking her dead in the eyes. I'll be much happier knowing my husband isn't sleeping with someone else while I'm out working to support him. And that was the end of that conversation. The divorce process itself was shockingly simple. Years ago, I had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, a decision I had made purely as a precaution, never imagining it would actually come in handy. Because of it, Nolan wasn't entitled to a single cent of what I had built. To make sure everything went smoothly, I hired the best lawyer I could find, and from the very beginning, it was clear that Nolan didn't stand a chance in court. The day our divorce was finalized, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was as if I had been carrying a weight on my shoulders without realizing just how heavy it was until it was finally lifted. For so long, I had been blinded by love, making excuses for Nolan's behavior, convincing myself that things would get better. But now, I was free. As word spread about what had happened between Nolan and Clara, people started reaching out, friends, family, even acquaintances, offering their support. Even Nolan's own relatives were disgusted by what he had done, making it clear that I had done the right thing by divorcing him. Their validation wasn't something I needed, but it was a relief to know that I wasn't alone in this. The only person still standing in Nolan's corner was Ruby. No matter how much proof she had seen, she still felt sorry for him. Maybe it was their bond, maybe it was her way of coping. Either way, it was something I had to accept. But I wasn't about to let it ruin my new life. This year, I decided to go all out for my birthday. It was my first one as a single woman after being married to Nolan for so long, and I wanted to celebrate my freedom properly. My friends and I planned a huge party, catered food, plenty of drinks, and a guest list of around 50 to 60 people. It was going to be a night to remember. Miles was, of course, invited. By then, his divorce from Clara had finally been finalized after months of court battles, and we had only grown closer as friends. I also sent an invitation to Ruby, but I made one thing very clear: Nolan was not welcome. He was still living with her, and the last thing I needed was him showing up and ruining my night. The party started off perfectly. The energy was high, people were doing shots, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. When it came time to cut the cake, some of my close friends gave speeches, talking about how proud they were of me for getting through such a brutal year. They spoke about the betrayal I had endured and how much stronger I seemed now. Their words meant everything to me. Then, out of nowhere, Ruby stood up. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had been drinking, her cheeks were flushed, and she looked a little unsteady, but so had most of the guests. I figured she just wanted to wish me a happy birthday, maybe share a sweet memory or two. But I was wrong. Instead, she turned the entire moment into a public attack. With tears in her eyes and frustration in her voice, she started criticizing me in front of everyone. She said she was disappointed in me for throwing away my marriage, that I had shattered everything she thought was perfect about our family. She accused me of being selfish, of only thinking about myself when I decided to divorce Nolan. She even had the audacity to say that, despite his mistakes, her father was heartbroken and that I should have at least tried to fix things. I was stunned. For a moment, I couldn't even process what was happening. My own daughter, standing in front of a room full of people, defending the man who had humiliated and betrayed me. But before I could even open my mouth, my friends jumped to my defense. Miles was the first to speak. His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. He told Ruby that she had no right to be angry at me when it was her father who had destroyed everything. He reminded her that, as my daughter and as a fellow woman, she should be standing by me, not blaming me for something that wasn't my fault. Others chimed in too, backing me up, making it clear that they weren't going to sit by and let her tear me down. Ruby tried to argue, but her words were lost in the rising frustration of the crowd. And as I stood there, watching her struggle to defend the indefensible, I realized something. No matter how much I loved my daughter, no matter how much I wished she would understand, I couldn't force her to see the truth. She would have to figure that out on her own. The room was filled with murmurs and side glances, but then, out of nowhere, some of the guests started booing Ruby. The sound hit me like a punch to the chest. People were genuinely appalled by the way she was treating me, especially on a night that was supposed to be about celebrating my strength, not tearing me down. I looked at her, my daughter, the person I had raised and loved more than anyone in this world. And in that moment, a wave of emotions crashed over me: hurt, disappointment, anger, but most of all, sadness. Through the lump in my throat, I spoke. "Ruby," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "I think you've forgotten something important." The room fell silent. "I was the one who built this life for us," I continued. "From the very start, it was me who provided for this family. Your father, he moved into my house after we got married. And while I was pregnant with you, he never truly stepped up as a parent. When I went into labor, it was me who endured the pain to bring you into this world. When it came to raising you, I was the one who stayed up at night, the one who made sure you had everything you needed. Even when I had to go back to work, I was the one who hired a nanny to help with your care because your father wasn't capable of taking responsibility. Ruby stood there, her expression unreadable, but I wasn't done. It was my income that kept a roof over our heads, my hard work that put food on the table, my sacrifices that gave you the comfortable life you grew up in. And when you started looking for career opportunities, it was me who used my connections to help you get that internship. It was me who made sure you had a stable foundation for your future. I took a breath before delivering the final blow. And your father? He was just there. He did nothing. He was the fun parent, the one who showed up for a few hours a day while I was the one making sure our lives didn't fall apart. Ruby's face twisted, but she didn't interrupt. And now, I said, my voice thick with emotion, after everything I've done not just for you, but for our family, you're standing here, in front of everyone, blaming me for choosing myself for the first time in my life. I shook my head. I won't allow it. With a deep breath, I made my decision. Ruby, I love you. But I'm not going to let you ruin this night for me. You need to leave. Her eyes widened, and for a brief second, I saw something flicker there, shock, maybe even regret, but then she straightened her shoulders, her anger taking over once again. If I leave now, I'm leaving for good, she shot back, her voice sharp, almost daring me to stop her. I exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. If that's what you want, I said, forcing myself to stand firm, then so be it. For a moment, she just stood there, like she was waiting for me to take it back. But I didn't. I couldn't. And then, without another word, she turned and walked out. I watched her go, my heart breaking into a million pieces. But deep down, I knew I had to choose myself this time. This wasn't about being selfish. This was about standing up for the life and happiness I deserved, no matter who tried to make me feel guilty for it. Update 1. I never expected this kind of response. Ever since the party, my phone has been flooded with messages, some from family members who were there that night, telling me I was too harsh, that I should have handled things privately instead of humiliating Ruby in front of everyone. Some even urged me to reach out and apologize because she's going through a lot. I've thought about it a lot. And honestly, I still don't think I was wrong. As a mom, guilt is something I've carried with me for years. Even now, there's a part of me that wonders, should I have tried harder? Should I have swallowed my pride, stayed in a broken marriage, just for Ruby's sake? But then I remember. I did try. I tried for years. And Nolan made his choice. I don't know why Ruby is so fixated on defending him. Maybe it's because she's an only child and never thought our family would be one of the ones to fall apart. Maybe, in her mind, it was easier to blame me for leaving than to accept the fact that her father was the one who ruined everything. But the truth is, I never imagined this for myself either. I never thought I'd be a divorced woman. I never thought I'd have to stand up to my own daughter at my own birthday party. But Nolan's actions left me with no choice. And I refused to feel guilty for choosing to walk away. Update 2. It's been about a month and a half since my last update, and for those of you asking about Nolan and Clara, I have news. I had mentioned before that Miles and Clara's divorce took much longer than mine. The main reason? Unlike me, Miles and Clara had 3 kids together, and they never had a prenup. That meant everything had to be battled out in court. But here's the kicker, Miles had undeniable proof that Clara cheated. And in our state, that meant she had no right to alimony. She fought tooth and nail for it anyway. Her lawyer tried every trick in the book, but in the end, Miles won that battle. However, because they share children, she was able to secure child support. Which, to be fair, Miles never fought against. He loves his kids and has no problem providing for them. As for Clara and Nolan? Let's just say karma has been busy. But I'll save that for another time. For now, all I can say is, I'm finally at peace. Since Miles has a solid income, the child support he's paying for his 3 kids is more than enough to cover not just their needs, but Clara's too. Honestly, she won't even need a full-time job. She could probably get by comfortably with just a part-time gig if she wanted. But here's where things take a turn. After weeks of silence, after cutting me off completely since the party, my daughter, Ruby, finally reached out to me. And she was in tears. It turns out that just a few days after my birthday, Nolan blindsided her with an announcement. Clara and her 3 kids would be moving in with them for a few weeks. No discussion. No warning. He just dumped the decision on her, expecting her to be okay with it. Ruby was shocked, to say the least. This was her place. Her home. And yet, somehow, she was the last to know that a whole new family was about to take over her space. But the worst part? She was now expected to take on the financial burden of housing and feeding all of them. Nolan and Clara didn't have jobs, meaning every grocery bill, every utility, every little expense fell squarely on Ruby's shoulders. Nolan told her to embrace this new family dynamic, said they could all start fresh together. Except, it didn't feel like a fresh start to Ruby. It felt like a takeover. The moment Clara and her kids walked through that door, they acted like they owned the place. Ruby, who works from home, lost every ounce of privacy she had. The house was always noisy, always crowded. And worst of all? Nolan and Clara would just drop their kids on her, vanishing for hours on their little dates while she was left playing unpaid babysitter. Ruby had reached her breaking point. And so, after weeks of radio silence, after humiliating me in front of all my friends and family, she called. Not to apologize. Not to acknowledge how cruel she'd been. No, she called because she needed me to fix it. She begged me to talk to Nolan, to make him and Clara move out because she was too scared to stand up to him herself. I won't lie. Hearing her say those words made my blood boil. After everything, after she defended him so fiercely, after she turned her back on me, now she wanted my help? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, and I told her the truth. Ruby, you made your choice. You stood by your father, no matter what. You told me I was wrong, that I was the bad guy for leaving. Well, now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. You picked your side. Now, stick to it. She was silent for a moment. Then, her voice turned angry. She accused me of being a bad mother. Told me it was my duty to stand up for her. I almost laughed at the irony. Where was this sense of duty when she humiliated me at my own party? Where was this understanding of fairness when she sided with her father without a second thought? I refused to argue with her. Instead, I hung up. And since then? She hasn't stopped. She's been blowing up my phone with calls and messages, demanding I help her, trying to guilt-trip me into fixing her mess. Update 3. I've had some time to think, and honestly, I agree with what a lot of people have been saying. Ruby is completely spineless when it comes to her father. I don't know why she's so blinded by him, why she keeps giving him chance after chance. But I do know this: I will not be helping her. It's obvious what's happening here. Nolan and Clara are using Ruby as a free babysitter and a financial crutch. And unless she stands up for herself, they'll keep leeching off of her for as long as they can. The fact that Nolan had the nerve to move Clara in after everything just proves my decision to divorce him was the best thing I ever did. If I hadn't left, I guarantee you he would have kept his affair going indefinitely. Since Ruby refused to listen to me over the years, maybe she needs to learn this lesson the hard way. That being said, I did decide to send her one final message and email, just like some of you suggested. Here's what I wrote. Subject: take control of your life. Hey Ruby, I'm still hurt by how you treated me, but that doesn't change the fact that you need to stand up for yourself. This is your home. You shouldn't have to put up with Dad and Clara acting like they own the place. It's time to take control. You need to tell them they can't stay there, set clear boundaries, and stick to them. Because if you don't, they will continue to use you. They'll keep draining your money, your time, and your energy for as long as you allow it. Your father is not your responsibility. I hope you find the strength to do what's right for yourself. If, in the future, you truly realize the error in your ways and want to apologize, I'll be here. But until then, take care. Mom. After sending that, I took one more step. I reached out to Miles. I told him everything: how Clara was staying at Ruby's place, how she was dumping their kids on Ruby while she ran off with Nolan, how she was intentionally keeping Miles in the dark. Turns out, he had just started suspecting something was off. Clara had been careful; she never let him pick up the kids from Ruby's place. Instead, she always arranged for them to meet in a neutral location. And apparently, she had even coached the kids to keep quiet about where they were living. When Miles heard the full story, he was livid. He told me he had been questioning whether the rumors were true, but now that I had confirmed it, his mind was made up. He and his lawyer were going to fight for full custody. And if Miles succeeds, Clara is done. With no child support coming in and neither her nor Nolan having jobs, their financial situation will go from bad to disastrous. And if Ruby finally gathers the courage to kick them out, they'll have nowhere to go. I don't know what's going to happen next. But I do hope that, for once, my daughter does the right thing.